All right, we're getting some people in.
Oh, Giga and Bob are there too.
Okay, coolest shirt goes to Giga.
Thank you. Is there a reward for that?
I think there's no bigger reward than to be able to wear it anyway, so.
True that.
All right, so I guess we're a little late, and then we're waiting for people to join in as well. I guess probably people will be joining as we go. So I guess we can get started. What do you guys think?
Think so?
All right. I'm going to share my screen, give a little bit of an intro, a presentation. Should be visible now, I guess. Or now.
Yeah. Now. Yeah.
Okay. So, hi again, everybody. Welcome to the second Open Office Hours of the ChatDKG project. We'll chat a little bit today. There will be obviously a slot for open discussion. We want to introduce you with the actual framework again a little bit and give updates on what's going on, what's been happening the last couple of weeks since we basically started. And yeah, essentially we'll go through the quick presentation. So buckle up, sit tight, enjoy your coffee or whatever you're drinking, and yeah, feel free to post any questions. I think you can do that also in Zoom, but we'll, like I said, be able to also participate in the discussion relatively soon. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead. So what is the agenda for today? We're going to be briefly touching upon, again, what ChatDKG framework is about. We'll provide some more grant program details because there is a grant program. If you haven't heard, you will hear it today. Some steering committee updates, really exciting ones, and basically opening up the discussion. So super simple, super streamlined. Let's jump right into it. So we'll quickly introduce the ChatDKG framework. Now, if you're looking for more context, we introduced ChatDKG and the motivations behind it, the problem that is trying to solve in depth on the previous call, which is recorded, and you can find it on YouTube. It's open, and totally recommend you to watch it because it was really good. Actually, we had a really awesome discussion. Today we want to go so deep. Well, we're gonna just introduce what the framework is about, briefly touch on the problem, and then we're gonna go into the details of the grant program and the general updates. So the idea is to have more of a discussion this time rather than go through the whole story again. All right, so ChatDKG, what is this about? I'll show a quick video, 30 seconds, just to give you some context. If it loads, it loads. Do you even hear sound, by the way? Or do I only hear? I'm the only one hearing the music. Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Nicer for me. Yeah, so essentially what you're seeing is kind of a video demo of interacting with trusted knowledge or knowledge assets of OriginTrail through a chat interface. And actually, as part of that demo, you also see those knowledge assets and their sources. So I can actually skim through it again. Basically, when you get when you basically ask a question, rather what this does is instead of doing a generative response from something like ChatGPT, the idea is here to get some source, trusted information sources, both from the perspective of having an identity associated to it, so whoever the issuer and the owner of the information is, but also to have verifiable, structured knowledge that you can basically use to provide answers for. So this is not again, the ChatDKG is not an application. It's not like what you're just seeing now. What you're seeing now is really just a demo of how it could look like, of a demo interface, really. But to illustrate the point, we're trying to build actually rather a very open framework that enables such, let me go there again, to enable such type of interactions, generally at the crossroads of the decentralized knowledge graph and AI technologies. And the chat interface is one of the most interesting new interfaces that either in this textual or some other form of conversational interface we think will dominate the coming years, obviously. And so, having that said, you might have seen this slide last time. The ChatDKG framework is really an open framework for efficient searching, accessing, and utilization of trusted knowledge with AI. Essentially, the aim of ChatDKG is to provide tools to tackle the problem of misinformation. And you might have seen previously in many cases, if you've been using ChatGPT, for example, I've used ChatGPT to ask about some transactions on blockchain. For example, if you ask about Polkadot and their amazing XCM feature, how it can be used, it gave me an answer that I need something called XCM tokens, which doesn't exist. Super simple example, you can probably try it. I'm not sure if that's been fixed in any way, but long story short, it's super easy to run into a wrong answer. And that's not to blame on the technology. That the technology is great. We don't think that ChatGPT is a bad thing. Rather, it can produce misinformation. But even without AI, there's been a lot of misinformation in the world. Sure, you've seen fake news, propaganda, all sorts. So the idea here is to tame this problem and tackle it. So we build tools that enable us to somehow make sure that the end result of a certain interaction with, let's say, a human-computer interaction with an AI or even traditional system relies on trusted information that comes from trusted sources that you can actually verify on your own end. So ChatDKG framework, the idea of this is to collaboratively develop such tools. The objectives are listed on the screen. So to create technical tools based on knowledge assets and AI. Knowledge assets are basically these core components of the technology we're building at OriginTrail, which is the decentralized knowledge graph. Knowledge assets incorporate these properties of verifiability, ownership, and essentially discoverability. And they are, in essence, knowledge graphs packaged as NFTs. Some people call them NFTs for knowledge. So, but basically provide these value propositions, and they're very useful in the context of AI. What we're trying to do here also is to establish best practices on how they can be discovered, accessed, queried, and verified with AI tools, and generally, not just to use and query, but rather to generate a lot of trusted open knowledge that can be proliferated through the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph mainnet, and that involves crowdsourcing efforts. So this is on a high level, quick explanation of the objectives of ChatDKG framework. If you were to think about the framework in some, let's say, more general sense, and this is, by the way, a pretty generic explanation, the idea is to keep it that way so we can, so we don't narrow it down to one specific case. You can observe several layers. We have some data sources that would either be open data or even personal information, some training data, perhaps enterprise systems. We had a lot of experience with, particularly the last group, enterprise systems within the applications we've been building so far. And these data sources essentially need a way to turn this data into knowledge. So the second layer would be basically this data to knowledge tools, where all different kinds of things like traditional data pipelines or even novel tools like LLMs or data translators of some sort can be used, coming into this AI-ready knowledge, which really comes, let's say, with two major components. One is having knowledge bases, so places where knowledge is stored, and that can be traditional things like Wikidata or Google, but also modern, let's say, data sources like, for example, Hugging Face provides a lot of valuable data for AI models, or OriginTrail as itself. You can consider the decentralized knowledge graph as a data or knowledge base, rather, itself a decentralized one. On the other hand, indexing infrastructure is needed to somehow sift through these knowledge bases, find relevant information. Those can be centralized or decentralized. You can search on Google. They have a pretty good knowledge graph. Every time you do a search with Google, by the way, you also interact with their knowledge graph under the hood. But also tools. Llama Index is one of the cool new ones. OriginTrail is in a way also an indexing infrastructure. You can query things across the network as well to discover in which particular knowledge base some knowledge can be found. Once we get to this knowledge, then we need some interfaces that are basically AI knowledge interface components that somehow interact with AI solutions on top. And those solutions you can consider as like what we see today as, let's say, ChatGPT, or you can consider a tool that is more, let's say, industry specific. For example, this Aid Trust in the upper right corner is one of the products that's powered by OriginTrail that we've been working on with our partners from British Standards Institution, that is essentially a specific tool for pharma industry to track what's going on within the pharma supply chain. These tools would also be AI enabled because they're actually already very close, because they have the first three layers taken care of. So adding additional functionality in, for example, enterprise tools is also something that's very interesting. The idea is to rather keep a kind of a wide applicability of the framework, so that we don't, again, like I said, narrow it down to a very specific use case, but rather open up the area for value to be proliferated in different places. All right. So what we're really looking at here is this intersection of the two new approaches in artificial intelligence, this more older, let's say, symbolic approach and the newer neural approach. And essentially, I'm not going to spend too much time here. We also talked about this last time, but essentially exploring where these two approaches have good synergy. And on the left, you see this knowledge graph, basically embodying the symbolic approach, and the embedded representation embodying the neural approach. Both of them have some really, really good qualities and downsides. And combining them together, the idea here would be to benefit from both the upsides of the both approaches, essentially. So looking from that perspective, if you've been involved in one or the other approach, it will be beneficial perhaps for even existing things you're already building, just to inherit the value propositions of the other, or ideally combine connected value of both approaches through ChatDKG. There's a lot to be talked about here, for everything from knowledge graph embeddings to all kinds of very interesting topics, which we obviously cannot go into right now, but would be super great if anybody wants to chat more about it. We can do that through Project Discord or a call like this. With, like I said, we'll have open discussion later. All right, quick example of something that we've already done that would fall, let's say, if this is still all very vague, this example can give you one more concrete example of what would fall under the auspices of ChatDKG, which actually looks a lot like the first interface that I showed in that video. So think of a system that actually looks like a chat interface, but rather is a search interface under the hood. So imagine typing in a natural language question that actually goes into a knowledge base of knowledge assets and finds a certain answer there, doesn't modify it, doesn't do much with it, just tells you, okay, this is the most likely answer. And this is a proof of concept we actually delivered for one of our clients, because they were looking into how they can benefit further from the knowledge assets that they have. So you can sort of distinctly see three components here. One is this first natural language question component. So you have a question at the beginning, and then there's like a search step. The search step, what we've done was to do in parallel the vector similarity search on one side, and we use BERT, Google's BERT model. On the other hand, the more classic search in something you might have seen with Elastic or OpenSearch by Amazon, the similar approach, basically the old approach where you're matching terms of search query. And those two we actually ran on knowledge assets, which were previously created through a certain pipeline, basically out of certain organizational documents. We had introduced a graph builder, which together with an ontology to structure this information and some enrichment pipeline and vectorization, obviously for vector similarity search, was basically all together used as this data to knowledge pipeline and created the knowledge assets that the search from this natural language question basically was executed on. And then this final part was, once a search is executed, you get a list of ranked knowledge assets and components of knowledge assets that would fit the question. Then there's a reasoning step, something that basically tries to go further than just ranking a list. So taking these search results and then doing a certain type of reasoning. What's cool here, you can do different things. Like I said, we have this combination of symbolic and neural approach. If you go knowledge graph way or symbolic way or semantic web way, which is all pretty much the same, you can apply ontological reasoning. This is more, let's say, strict. It's more like your mathematical logic, the one that you learned in school, right? Basically, these logical rules can be encoded and very well executed on graphs or in the symbolic way. On the other hand, on the neural approach is a bit different, but both those can basically be combined. In this case, where we worked on this proof of concept, we used mostly the first approach, and in the end, basically provided a list of results which contained the content, the relevant and related knowledge assets this came from, the source document, the actual owner, issuer, a blockchain immutability proof, and finally some confidence score. And essentially, this is one way to do basically semantic search or natural language extractive answering on a set of knowledge produced from organizational documents. The benefits over running this just with the basic with just an LLM would be that it's not a generative approach. So there's a minimized surface of error. So that when you ask a question, you don't get the opportunity for the system to hallucinate. Rather, the system goes and finds some answers. It gives you back results? Does it give you maybe the best result on top of the list? That's basically up to tuning the system, and that can be done through user feedback, which is also here on this chart. But ultimately, there is no way for the system to invent something that didn't exist because it was trying to generate an answer for you as that is its task. So this is one more practical example of something you can fit in this framework, but not the only thing, obviously. And we're absolutely looking for cool ideas in other angles of this framework. The four areas that we generally decided to prioritize when we launched this program was this semantic search of knowledge assets, which is essentially variations of the previous chart. For example, vector similarity search based on knowledge assets. If that's interesting to you, integrating tools that are emerging in the space of vector similarity search with the knowledge assets in OriginTrail would be something that you could do, and that will fit the framework. Also, natural language querying over DKG, for example, something that would create a Sparkle query for the knowledge graph out of, let's say, natural language questions, things that would fit well into the context of what we discussed previously in terms of interactions with AI systems. And by the way, if you haven't heard about Sparkle before, Sparkle is your SQL for graphs. It's a standardized W3C querying language and protocol for graphs. So if you haven't used it, it's not too hard if you've done SQL. So don't be worried about it. It's not like it's not an extremely heavy thing. No, it's very powerful. The third area is AI-based knowledge publishing tools. So the idea is that we create tools that create knowledge assets from, and then somehow utilize AI for that. For example, agents that could create could create knowledge by semantically enriching information. The fourth area is more generic, so general integrations, such as integrations with Bard, LangChain, also fall. So it's more about you as a builder figuring out, this would be a useful tool for other builders because maybe it was useful for me. So, and that could be that it doesn't fall into the three other groups. And generally, it's possible to apply for a grant with general ideas relevant to application of AI-DKG. The criteria, though, is listed below. So it has to be a public open source project. So if you're building something, the repo needs to be public, needs to have a proper open source license, has to apply to knowledge assets, has to solve a meaningful problem, and the idea is to do it actively in development with others, together with us, basically through the ChatDKG Discord. Obviously, we cannot sort of include it in the framework if we don't know about it or if we don't understand it. So we'd like to build this together, and that's also why this is a criteria. So having that said, there's a 1 million trace token grant for projects that for builders that would apply with their projects. And actually, I'm going to jump quickly into that to show you ChatDKG AI, which is this repo we just recently launched. Actually, the website goes to GitHub immediately, which has all of the necessary information. So if you look into the README, basically here it will explain to you what ChatDKG is. Even has that video that I showed at the beginning. Points out all of the areas that are relevant, what are the objectives, and so on. And there's more details here on the grant. So particularly, there are 3 levels of grants that are available. These are grants that are made available by Trace Labs, where the core development company behind OriginTrail, the core developers. So there's a Rabbit level, something that you can do quickly. Therefore, the Rabbit can be a smaller project. And that's where we have a budget of up to 25,000 trace tokens. The Eagle level is the next level, which is a little bit bigger projects, 50K trace tokens. And then Phoenix is something which would be of a larger size, something that takes probably a bit longer time, which is up to 100,000 trace tokens. Obviously, this is just some criteria that depends on what you're looking to build and what ideas you might have. But these would be the 3 levels of grants that you can apply for. And then essentially the potential for each project is going to be evaluated by the steering committee. ChatDKG as a framework, by the way, has a steering committee. So I'll mention that a little bit more on that very soon, which is there to evaluate basically what level the project fits in based on the 3 criteria here: the utility of OriginTrail, DKG, and knowledge assets, the breadth, how is this something that we can be applied to many things? Is it widely applicable or is it very narrowly applicable? And ideally, it should be, if possible, as widely applicable as possible. And then obviously scalability. Is this something that can be used in many places in a scalable way? That is, it's a bit more, let's say, generic thought. But once you look at the specific case, it's generally very easy to understand. The challenge areas, like we talked about just now, I won't repeat it. It's basically the same content as from the presentation. And then you have some information on how to start, basically how to apply, what is expected from you in terms of working on your idea and submitting the results. The idea here is that this is not a very complex, lengthy process. It's not like, like if you open the grant application, which I'm going to do now, it's pretty simple. It's a Google form. There's not a lot of questions here. It asks you to provide some basic information about you, how many people are on your team, just a little bit of information about you, which category or challenge area do you think your project fits into, obviously explaining a bit more about the project. And yeah, that's it. It's the idea is not to be bureaucratic. The idea is rather to be interactive. So if you have an idea and you're not like exactly sure, how to perfectly formulate it, that's also okay. If it's better to apply earlier than later, because by the way, that grant program is on a rolling basis. So there's no, let's say, application deadline. Rather, it's there until the budget lasts. So I encourage everybody who wants to apply sooner rather than waiting 3 more weeks to make your project look perfect in terms of application. And also feel free to reach out in Discord. That's the best place to ask questions. If you ask a question there, also others get to see it, so we don't get to repeat. Like if you ask them privately, it's useful for everybody. All right, we were at the steering committee as well. Essentially, the steering committee has a couple of responsibilities. They're there to guide the ChatDKG development, to support the builders, both in advising, but also throughout the grant application process, selection, all kinds of execution support later, and generally to facilitate the discussions through the ChatDKG channel. So you can consider the steering committee as being one of the most important aspects of the ChatDKG framework, and also is open. So if anybody wants to apply for being a member of the steering committee, please contact us. That's it's possible to join the steering committee. Though keep in mind that the candidates for steering committee need to be strong in the relevant areas that are indicated for ChatDKG. So if you've never done anything with knowledge graphs or AI before, or in general in that area, you probably don't qualify. But if you had experience in one or more of these areas, you might qualify. We'd like to hear from you. And having that said, I'm very proud to introduce our new steering committee member, Oshani, who is joining us also on the call today. I've seen her wave, even though I'm sharing the screen. So I'll let her introduce herself just in a moment. But very briefly, Oshani is an assistant professor at RPI in New York, also PhD and many other titles in computer science from MIT, which the cool fact of it is that she's done all of that under the supervision of Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who, if you haven't heard of him, you should check up on your internet history, because the guy literally invented World Wide Web and the semantic web, which is this let's say notion of knowledge graphs came up about from. Oshani's primary research focus is decentralized systems. She was previously at Oracle and other initiatives that are also somewhat mentioned below. She leads the decentralized knowledge graphs track at the Knowledge Graph Conference in New York, and is a long-term contributor at the Semantic Web Conference, Web Science Conference, IEEE Blockchain Conference, and IEEE Decentralized Application Conference. And this is only a gist. There's a lot more to be said. We're super happy to have Oshani join us and contribute to ChatDKG. Having that said, Oshani, I give the floor to you, maybe to introduce yourself in a couple of minutes, and tell us about yourself.
Thanks so much for having me in the steering committee. It's an honor to be part of this great initiative. I think you said a lot about myself. I don't know if I've got anything else to say. But one thing I can say is I'm very, very passionate about this particular area, because I think this has a really big potential, and both from a business point of view. I'm an academic, so I like to solve difficult problems, and I see lots of interesting problems in this space that need solving. So I think together we can make the world a little bit of a better place by, solving these problems one at a time. Yeah, that's pretty much what I want to say, and happy to be part of this, group and, continue making real progress.
Fantastic. Welcome again, Oshani, and really looking forward to working together through the steering committee and through the ChatDKG framework. All right. So I've been speaking for about 30 minutes. One thing I also want to mention, I'm almost at the end of my speech, is that, again, we're building this together, and we'd really love to see whoever is still not in the channel join us. So come into Discord, let's chat. You can scan this code on your screen, or if you can type this link, it's R4TR. Just kidding. Basically, you can jump into OriginTrail Discord and jump into the ChatDKG channel, or scan this with your phone. We'd love to see you there. And this is where we continue chatting outside of these calls. So without further ado, I would like to stop here. And I've been speaking for 30 minutes. I think it's only appropriate to let other people speak, because I'm not the main character here. Yeah, let's kick it off with.
I have a clarifying question.
Yes, go ahead.
So, for example, if I have a student who would like to participate in the grant program, is that a conflict of interest because I'm supervising that student and I'm on the steering committee? Or should I take this?
No, I wouldn't see it as a. I will act as a counterweight. I will be just, oh no. No, I'm kidding. I think it'd be great to have you be an advocate for the program in faculty and university. Like it's only, I can only see upsides. So for sure.
So perhaps I can recuse myself in the selection process, maybe, but I can actively advise the student to participate and do the project.
Yeah, I think everyone's going to come with their, kind of open heart to this in terms of supporting the teams that will apply. So yeah, I think they'll not only get your guidance but also our 2 cents if they turn out to be valuable, and as will also others.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that for me. I also have another question. Sorry, I have more questions than anyway. So I hope this will lead to some discussion. So Branimir, in your presentation, you mentioned about generating Sparkle queries. Now, I'll tell you about some recent project I've done. But on some level, it seems kind of not necessary. If you can get an answer from a chat interface, why bother with a Sparkle query? Unless it's for a super user, programmer who wants to actually get to some nitty-gritty detail or to debug the output. So it's the goal, why I'm saying this, it's because I think it's very important to do the prompt engineering to get something out of natural language text, rather than asking it to generate the Sparkle query and then debug the Sparkle query. So that it's kind of competing goals. And some recent work I've done is to give ChatGPT a very, very complex health insurance policy and ask it to generate an N3, which is this notation 3 syntax for writing a rule, and also a smart contract to evaluate that particular policy. And what we realized was that if you give it right away, the generative output changes a lot across different runs. But if you do proper prompt engineering, then the variance is actually much, much smaller. So at least our conclusion was that the best thing to do is to do the prompt engineering rather than get the code and debug it later, because the modeling, all those things going to be so different. So I this is not really a question, but rather a discussion point. So perhaps there are these 2 different alternatives to solving the same problem, and perhaps we have to figure out which path is probably the most fruitful path. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, you are speaking, but you are not heard. It is due to the button of mute.
just throwing words out and nobody hears me. Yeah, thanks, Lashani. I think this is a really great and valuable perspective. And yeah, I think such projects are all about like, trying and figuring things out. And if you manage to get to the stage where you have such learnings, it's really, really awesome. And thank you for sharing that. And I hope we get to share more of that through ChatDKG. I think there's still value to generating, or in some sensible way, generating Sparkle queries. Not sure exactly how wide or narrow it is. Like you said, maybe it's for debugging or for some very nitty-gritty power user, perhaps. That's why we're trying to, let's say, stay open in that sense of having the ability to, let's say if somebody has that ability and it's somehow a semi-tackled problem, and it's currently not, by the way, from what we've done as research internally, we found a bunch of interesting, there's a SP-BERT model, Sparkle BERT, trained on Sparkle queries and so on. And there's a bunch of questions there. For example, when you train something like a classic model like that to a certain set of Sparkle queries, it's also questionable what type of input queries and questions did you give, and what's the ontology behind it? Can it be generalized? But all of that under the premise of likely finding use with accessing, rather extracting information from existing knowledge bases in a Sparkle way. Now, is that going to be something long-term, or is prompt engineering going to take over? Maybe. So it would be great to sort of explore both. And the way I hear your thoughts is more as feedback, as into maybe providing a bit more examples for the second category, which is where I think the prompt engineering fall in. If I go back to the presentation, it's the natural language querying over DKG. So could be one of the examples we can add there, rather than just focus on Sparkle.
Right.
Or fixate.
Actually, so we've tried giving it a particular target ontology. So if we say, oh, create, we actually didn't do the Sparkle query generation, but we did the notation 3, output, which I think is somewhat similar to Sparkle queries. But we say, okay, use the concepts available in this particular ontology in creating the N3 output, but it still doesn't really stick to the concept. Like it'll somehow create new terms in the N3 output, and then the prefixes are all wonky. Like there are even though you prime it with an ontology, it might still not generate the thing that you want. So I do see the benefits of both, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So you have to use the terms. So but the ChatGPT output produces something that's similar. So as a human, you might have to go back and correct it, but you have something to start with without starting from scratch. So I do see benefits of that. So, but yeah, it's a nice kind of an evaluation, like thought experiment to do in the long run, and see which approach kind of wins the game, maybe.
Yeah, perhaps
some Q&A if you want to look at.
Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you there. Sorry.
I was going to say, I saw somebody had a question in the Q&A. I don't know how to answer that, but
okay. Yeah, we have a question. Maybe just before we get off topic there, so I don't lose the thought. What you mentioned there, one of the interesting topics that we see as also on the side of the roadmap for OriginTrail is, one of the things on the roadmap is really how best to utilize the information that's already highly structured in, let's say, graph form in the context of smart contracts, as you mentioned. And one of those, the interesting elements there is being, obviously, if you look at smart contracts across the Web3, the ones that gained a lot of traction and adoption in, let's say, for example, DeFi world, they depend a lot on oracles. This concept of feeding information from outside blockchain into the blockchain. And this is usually a number. For example, in DeFi world, it's a price of some token. But if you generalize it more, it could be any piece of information. And even then, likely this needs to have somewhat of a tight structure, if you might say it like that. So that's where we think naturally knowledge graphs fit really well with ontologies. And then you have a smart contract that's supposed to execute, let's say, some monetary transaction, and you really want to be sure that it's doing what you want. Then you have to, then normally you think in terms of, highly structured information and abilities to not just access, but also get that information into the contract in that form. Therefore, for example, Sparkle seems quite interesting from that angle. And if you have a contract that's maybe a little bit more than what we currently see as the classic EVM world, rather a world which is a little bit more attuned to graphs, also in the roadmap of OriginTrail, something called graph contracts, then the idea would be that you are able to, let's say, provide information or a feed of information from the outside in some Oracle sense into a contract that's able to understand, this is actually the state, a symbolically represented state of the world. So lots of interesting angles to try there, and we're super happy actually to see if anybody has any thoughts on that as well from the Web3 angle. The question that was asked in the chat, when is Trace Labs going to reboot? The failed. It failed because of the drawbacks of centralization, but the concept was solid and seems right. Yeah, I'd say interesting. It's an interesting thought. It's actually interesting to look back in the last couple of years. A lot of these blockchain projects that are based in somewhat centralized or maybe administered systems, none of them, from what I know, made any wider impact and adoption in that sense and survived. So I didn't know much about TradeLens lately, to be honest, but I know about was it the IBM one, right? That was problematic. That kind of basically laid off a bunch of people. But yeah, I mean, the ideas are still valid. The problems are valid. However, the approach, we believe, is always the best to go with completely open, permissionless systems rather than creating something which is kind of a weird combination of the two worlds, something that is very decentralized, but permissioned is then really decentralized in the sense that we in our world consider that to be. But yes, I guess I don't know how better to answer that question other than OriginTrail technology is tackling such problems successfully in many areas already in different supply chains. So I encourage anybody who is interested to look up on our website. There's a lot of interesting case studies there.
I think Jure and Ken, actually, one of our advisors, they produced an article that covers the benefits of decentralization, and it, like the big also shift that's happening or might happen. Not sure how much you were kind of checking out also some of the reports that came out over the course of the last couple of weeks, but like McKinsey pulled out a number on the impact of AI technologies in the enterprise space, which is something that like a global trade would be, and it amounted to like 4.4 trillion, which literally adds one UK GDP per year to the world's value that gets generated with these types of technologies. And when we are looking at enterprise adoption of such technologies, this trusted foundation is at like its key, right? So you're not really necessarily trying to rely solely on generative approach where you could have too big of a variance when it comes to the to what's being generated with or without really pointing you to something that you can trust and lean on. So like ChatDKG like efforts are really the foundation that should enable a lot of that value within the global economy gets created, and actually propel also, let's call it experiment now, or a how to call it, like an initiative like TradeLens that was active to be much more efficient and even broad in scope, because the same trusted, if there would be a trusted foundation like DKG could offer you, if that would to be also coupled with the different AI tools, the value that can generate across the different fields of the international trade is just much larger, right? So literally from the documents handling to the insurance to the it's so multifaceted, but it all needs to rely on the fact that we have ownership over the data by each and every participant in this network. Otherwise, it's going to be flawed. That we have then also reasonable distribution of gains when this new value is created, and obviously then also be creative around new business models that can be produced. So I think it's the future is only bright for TradeLens like experiments in the future.
Yeah, I think maybe just to add to that, so the ChatDKG framework really plugs well into the, let's say, the issues that these guys were having, right? Because the issue there, why TradeLens, if you talk to also people that were kind of involved in there, they will say, in one word or one way or another, they will say yes, the concept made sense, it was good, but then at the end of the day, this was a somewhat centralized system owned by IBM and Maersk, right? So of course, then when you have competitors in an industry, you will have issues when they say, okay, now you need to share data with your major competitor, right? But don't worry, we won't look at it. So it's a bit of a kind of a weird setup to begin with, but the concept stands. And in the case of OriginTrail knowledge assets themselves, right? When you have such a wide ecosystem as the TradeLens was trying to cover, so the shipping industry, logistics, there are so many players involved. There's so many participants. Each one of them has a bunch of data that is related to a bunch of data from others. So how do you find a way to connect these things in a kind of also verifiable and trusted way, while keeping the data privacy, and then run AI algorithms and AI systems over it to get essentially all of the answers that you would be looking for? And once you have such a network of interconnected knowledge assets, then you can really just imagine what all you could ask, right? I mean, based on your, of course, data permissions as a persona in a supply chain, if you're a customs agent or if you're a kind of a operator in a specific organization, you would get different answers based on what you can see or not. But the potential for this is humongous, right? And I believe also that a large portion of that 4.4 trillion probably comes from supply chains and logistics, just because they are extremely vast industries.
I mean, there is this underlying value of connectivity, just like Professor Bob Metcalf, preaches. The more you can catalyze connectivity between different knowledge bases, the bigger the value of a system. And if a system is set in a way that it impedes connectivity rather than it kind of catalyzes connectivity, then it's likely bound to fail. And permission blockchains, if we can call them blockchains, I think was one such attempt. Blockchain as a concept was designed to boost connectivity in a way for transactions. And in some enterprise scenarios, they, I think, interpreted the technology in the wrong way. So they developed a kind of a system that remained closed and therefore also yielded very limited results.
All right. I guess we can chat about all kinds of things, and perhaps it's wise to ask a question. If anybody has anything, we kind of forgot about that, on the grant program, Maybe do you guys have any ideas you were thinking to apply with, you would like to get some answers for? Oh, there's a hand. Milos. Hello, Milos.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome, sir.
Great. Yeah, you cannot see me, I guess, since I'm not like one of the like main participants, but I guess it's fine just to speak like this. So yeah, I think that we have initially discussed about some ideas on the first call. So I posted that also at the group. So I plan to basically discover what we can build with the actual OpenAI plugins that are going to be available through a bunch of Microsoft products. And basically, I'm looking for participants and for the team in general. So if anyone wants to at first discuss the different ideas, since I think that there are multiple ways how it can be developed, and I see several layers of that. So first one is to basically build an architecture for future development of such plugins, and then we can probably discuss of multiple kinds of plugin that could be used for trust or for pushing some data on DKG and then retrieving that through various products or something like that. So if anyone wants to discuss about that, feel free to approach me at Discord chat, and yeah, we can continue discussion. I don't plan to start working on anything until we confirm that it's a good idea and that it's basically confirmed that and it's basically well discussed. So that's just some thoughts on that. So yeah, if you have any feedback, we can discuss either here or offline through the chat.
Thanks, Milos. I think is absolutely on point, 100%. When you mention ChatGPT plugins, two thoughts come to mind, or similar plugins. In the context of DKG, being a decentralized system, and ChatGPT being a centralized system, obviously, the interface between the two. Oh, there you are. We can see you. Awesome. Hello. So the interface between a centralized system and a decentralized system is you can design it in different ways. Likely the first type of design, and I've never built a ChatGPT plugin, but I assume that the ChatGPT plugin would need, let's say, a dedicated API that it interacts with, which likely is a centralized type of whatever type of API it is. But having that said, that doesn't diminish the value of the decentralized technology and the trusted information in it, because actually that is the point. When you read when you query the DKG with some client, that can ideally also be a client in your browser or whatever your machine you're querying it, and your client in your local environment is verifying all of the information for integrity proofs for identity and so on. So having that said, building my first two thoughts are, because if you were to build, let's say, a ChatGPT plugin for the DKG through ChatDKG, it would have to be an open source piece of code. So let's say you could open up a repo where you create this together with, ideally with somebody else. From what I understand, you're looking to work with someone also. You've also posted that question in Discord. And then, so that one thing is to create it. The other thing is let's say a kind of a production deployment, which we could help with. And when I say we could help, I mean Trace Labs. One of the things we could potentially provide is not just deploying this, but also enabling access to a node, for example, of DKG. So okay, the code of the repo would would be ready to be deployed on any node, but for the purposes of, let's say, an official ChatGPT plugin, we could provide that part of the infrastructure. And having that said, this would fit. So let's say if you were to apply with this could likely I definitely would qualify for the program. So it would be cool to see it.
Yeah, so I think that you made like an important point there with connecting like centralized and decentralized space. So basically, I consider that API, you're right. So it's basically an API that you describe with some kind of instructions that a user can access through OpenAI or like similar LLMs. But basically, I consider that more as a gateway. It has to be like centralized, but then beneath that is basically a decentralized knowledge graph. So it's probably stateless server that or like a set of servers in order to like scale properly that connects those two worlds. And yeah, I think regarding I think one step or one layer is how we build that from the perspective from the side of code and how we deploy that. And then another thing is what can be built on the top of that in terms of like application. But if we discover like potential cases that could be useful, I see a couple of benefits there. One is that okay, we are helping users to like achieve more, but generally we are also streamlining users to use the DKG. So if they need to like put some data on DKG, they can put the private data and the public data, of course, like private data within their contained network or something like that, but at least to have some kind of identifiers public or connections public. And then as a second step on the other side, they can retrieve such data through their like tools, like common tools that are widely used. So I think that's one of the benefits. Also, not only for like usage, but also for sourcing the DKG. But I think it's yet to be discussed on actual use cases and on actual platforms where the plugin is activated or used. So I think it's going probably to like differ across the board.
Yeah, you touch upon very important points. Perhaps let's say, one stone that kills multiple birds there, or a step towards that would be actually taking some form of concrete example. Like, let's say, okay, we build a ChatGPT plugin to query the DKG, but maybe for some specific subset of information. Or from a specific source or set of sources. And then likely this could be easier to start with, at least. For example, if it goes into querying specific knowledge domain, that likely means less, or let's say more specificity is possible due to specific knowledge domain usually being modeled by one or more ontologies, but not like, having a complete, so having the ability to have an ontology gives you the ability to understand, make more sensible queries if you're doing it in a Sparkle way. Or if you're not doing it in a Sparkle way, then the question is, if we extract a bunch of knowledge and put it in, let's say, a prompt of an LLM, what are the limitations of that? How much can we fit in? What type of instruction do we give the LLM to crunch what is received? And that's where, also coming back to that Sparkle discussion we had at the beginning, Sparkle could help. We could filter out by something, can potentially give, let's say, more meat on the bone for the LLM to then use. But yeah, actually very interesting topics. And I'd suggest, if you go in that direction, maybe also like the tool itself should not be maybe narrowed down, but the demonstration ideally would be something you could look for that could be narrow. Let's say we have this data, or we generate this data on the DKG, and because we have that data, we know the ontology, we can do this, and this is like an end-to-end case. So the stone that kills multiple birds could be a good demo, maybe, and that gives us learning together.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like with the points. So basically, we can build it broad in terms of technology to support other plugins and such kind of tools, and then in terms of putting that into some kind of production or to the end user, then probably we can target multiple use cases. And as Oshani mentioned, by using such an approach, I think that we reduce variance in generative responses from the LLMs. We give some good starting point, or we give a bias, but in a positive manner, where we don't allow a lot of variations while returning the results from the API and the DKG itself.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And now thinking of the question you had on who could help, and thinking of what Oshani mentioned, that maybe her students could participate. Maybe there's a synergy there. You maybe find a partner from somebody from RPI. But just thought. It's up to you guys.
I'm happy to publicize this within RPI. Of course, like my PhD students, I have I can actually guide them and supervise them on, because I see lots of research worthy topics in the things that we discuss. That would be like a very clear path. But of course, RPI undergrads are excellent. And this being the middle of the summer, I'm not sure how much access I have to them. But starting in the fall, late August, maybe I can recruit some students and spread the word out. Maybe it's too late by then, but I don't know. But I'll try to recruit some students.
Awesome. So we have another question in the chat. Luku, hi Luku. That name rings a bell. And it's a question for Giga. I'll read it out since I started. Could you give a bit more details about the requirements for asset publishers in relation to new OT Hub and the grant? Asking this for people that are building the new OT Hub but couldn't attend. Okay, I'll let Giga answer, but I'll give some context in the beginning. For people who don't know, OT Hub is a tool, a general tool for the DKG, which has been built by the DKG community. It's been running for several years now, and it's essentially was up until now gave the information for the network. Basically, you could figure out what was going on, how many nodes are on the network. If you have a node, you could get some information about your node, generally statistics on the activity of the network, and so on. And yeah, I guess I can also continue with answering. Basically, the idea for the new OT Hub, which we also want to sponsor through the grant program, is that it's more oriented towards creating knowledge assets on the DKG. So the functionality that was there before obviously is interesting still and should stay. But ideally, the idea here would be to enable anybody with essentially with a wallet and with as usable interface as possible to create their knowledge assets in a permissionless fashion through the interface on the DKG. Having that said, with the new V6 DKG, which was launched in December, that means also applying various ontologies, enabling different tooling around that. That means not just creating, but also updating or viewing the knowledge assets that you have. Think of it as, let's say you come with your own wallet, and you, let's say, connect with MetaMask, or you use the Web3 login type of thing, and once it opens up, it shows you which particular knowledge assets you have created. enables you to update them, enables you to, let's say, link to the DKG Explorer, which is, by the way, in the works and will be live relatively soon. So the idea is not to recreate, by the way, the features of the DKG Explorer. So that is the way to view into the graph and explore knowledge assets rather to create them. But if you're looking for, let's say, more clarity on this, we can also chat through the channel. The idea here being that we essentially empower the new OT Hub to leverage all of the new features of DKG V6 in particular, and then having this ability to generate as much valuable knowledge through the interface, which will also be very useful for ChatDKG because it will help us use that particular interface or any builders within the ChatDKG program or grant program rather to use it and to create and so we can crowdsource these knowledge assets. I've seen some hands go up and down. I'm not sure if anybody wants to jump in with any other.
It was me, and I just kind of wanted to go in direction you finished off on. So that this is why this makes sense under the ChatDKG umbrella is because when Milos does his great plugin for Microsoft systems, those are knowledge-hungry systems, and they'll be looking for some good knowledge and trusted knowledge assets can get created through this kind of gateway through the OT Hub. So that's why that's so aligned kind of with how ChatDKG approach is going, and OT Hub has a big potential to play like a good role within this ecosystem of tools getting developed in this scope.
And from what I'm hearing, if people are already building it, that sounds great. So awesome to hear it, guys. Looking forward to seeing it. All right. It's been a little over an hour. We can stay as much as we'd like. There's a lot more time if you guys want to discuss, but if we're kind of getting close to the end of our energy of the call, we can also start wrapping it up. Are there any other questions perhaps to the grant program or any topics anybody wants to raise or feels is good to share on this group? Everybody's being very quiet.
Agenda be published, Brady? Because I'm thinking of inviting my students to attend this, call. I think, not to, sway this in the more, research direction, but I think still it would be nice to have some PhD students who are, interested in what the community thinks so that they can help. The discussions here would help shape their research. So I would like to see like a published, not really an agenda, but like, a schedule of these meetings, if that's available so that I can share with my students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the end result of this program could also be that we also give grants in perhaps smaller chunks to those who are also participating in such a scientific paper. Because we would also like to reference then to those scientific papers to the extent where it's needed and necessary for the open source ChatDKG framework. So if they have any ideas how to participate with the scientific work, we can also see how a grant can support that.
Okay, that's excellent. But really, I'm wondering, is this every other Tuesday at this time? This particular office hour meeting?
Yeah, I believe that's the idea, and if there are any deviations, we can also let you know well in advance, so you can notify students.
Yeah, and I'm actually interested in research, research publications and things like that. So if anybody in the community wants to, engage in those research discussions, so you're more than welcome, and happy to collaborate.
That sounds great, actually. And I wanted to mention, to give you a perfect segue, there's such an inflow of, I cannot really blanket label them all great, but there's a bunch of, every week there's a new cool paper that comes out. And just now Shani shared one with me about proof of reputation with Nakamoto fallback. I cannot resist but to share it here. I'm going to dive deeper into it, but there's a bunch of cool papers, and if anybody sees interesting things that they would like to share or chat about, it would be awesome to share it also in Discord. There's a particularly interesting one I tweeted the other day about, but basically analyzes and gives a roadmap on solutions, on solution development based on LLMs and knowledge graphs. And it's written by, I think, a group of Chinese scientists. Still haven't had a chance to deeply dive into it, but it looks really, really promising. I see the paper is getting a lot of traction because I think people are only just now realizing that these two can fit really well together. And kind of inherently sort of feels that way for us because we've been in this world of decentralized knowledge graphs for a long time. But it would be also really, really cool to, let's say, share more of such information among each other, discuss more about it. Ideally, get those folks also to join the effort with us, maybe proliferate ChatDKG, which, by the way, I can ask anybody on the call, if please do share a bit more about the program. We'd really like to get some more cool people in and to build together with them. So yeah, if you have any cool papers or people or places to share this would be awesome. And super happy to go also into research direction. Like you said, I don't see it's a problem to sway it in that direction too much, as long as we build things people can use, of course.
Yeah, actually, on that note, there are at least two other communities. I mentioned one to you, Branimir. There's the DeSci movement. So actually, just this weekend, I met some people who, this company, they are selling, roasts in a table. Like they're creating NFTs for roasts, and, they operate in the clinical trial pharma, big pharma domain. So apparently some companies, they want to just buy like, few rows before they decide like, do they want to invest in the entire data set? And I'm thinking like, a row is really like a knowledge snippet, like, like one of these nodes, right? So there's this huge movement on DeSci, and I think it's one use case that you can apply ChatDKG for. And I'm currently attending a conference, this ACM Federated Computing Research Conference. And in that, yesterday, I attended a talk on Architecture 2.0. So it was a little bit more, hardware-oriented talk, but they essentially talked about data-centric AI. And I've heard this term from Andrew Ng also. But essentially, like the talk was about how to build better machine learning AI architectures for these large computational needs. But at the same time, they were talking about how to actually increase the efficacy of the data that's available. Now, they talk about data in a broad sense. I think knowledge graphs are, they are like, better than, just raw data. So I think, yeah, knowledge-centric AI, maybe, there is a movement like that, or maybe we should create something if that doesn't exist. But I think we should, tap into these, efforts to kind of promote these ChatDKG, kind of infrastructure.
That sounds really interesting. You're at the conference right now, if I understood you well. Yes,
I am in Orlando right now attending the ACM Federated Computing Research Conference.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about what you get to explore there. It sounds great, and definitely up for approaching folks like those and giving them what we can with all the great things that are going to be built with the ChatDKG framework. So absolutely up for it. Let's talk more.
Yep, for sure. Yeah.
All right. I was talking about this paper, by the way. Just sending a link so I don't miss it. I also post it in Discord if anybody's because this will disappear, of course. So maybe somebody gets interested in there. Fantastic. Okay. I don't see any more questions or hands raised. I guess we can, if that's it, if everybody wants to grab a coffee or a beer, or depending on where you are in the world, what time it is, I guess we can slowly close it down. I'll just give a quick final recap. If you're looking into applying with something, please don't hesitate to get in touch earlier. Doesn't have to be a perfect application. Rather, we can chat about it. With regards to OT Hub, if you guys who are building it need any additional information, feel free to reach out as well. Finally, if anybody has a cool idea to share or wants to build with somebody like in the same fashion as Milos mentioned, feel free to continue the discussion in Discord. We'd love to chat. And yeah, I guess that will be it. Thanks, everybody. It was great chatting again.
Thank you.
See you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay happy and healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.